Hey guys, this is Eric Weingartner with Weingartner Racing. Today's video is about these heads. Now these heads are really kind of unique. You don't see too many that are out there. I mean, you look on Facebook Marketplace, you might see them, but you're not entirely sure what you're looking at right here, right? So besides being a small block Chevy, which I know some of you are already sighing, and I get that. These are actually Pontiac 867 heads, but there's an exception. These must have been like the last run right after they got done, because these were used in NASCAR engines in the probably early 90s, late 80s. These were in the Pontiac stuff, and they were really, really cool. They're a 23-degree head, but they're, as you could tell, they're a raised runner head. Now, I ported these because this guy sent them in. He had a guy that was porting them, and he had started, and then he I guess something had happened. He might have passed away, or I believe. So then I had a half port to work with and tried to modify it to make it better. So in other words, I had to work with what was already there, so you can see that with the report stuff. But this head's really, really cool because it's of its heritage. So you see these spots here and here. That's because that's where there was used to be either it'd say Pontiac or it'd say Brodix. And you're like, what do you mean Brodix? Here is where the Pontiac logos used to be, which I'll show you what on another one would be. And it's a Pontiac here and here. Sometimes there would be a Brodix logo here or a part number here, and the reason why these probably got milled off is because it was the end of the NASCAR run, and whoever had them was like, we just got to get rid of them. We can't have them as claiming to be us, so you get the idea. What exactly do they look like without this milled off? Well, let me take you over to the head, and then I'll come back and I'll tell you all the specs on this one. They look like this. See, it says Pontiac, and there's, you see your Pontiac logo, Pontiac, and there's your logo. Up here at the top, there was a part number here. And by the way, that ends at 867. That's a Pontiac thing. And it's a Pontiac over there. The later ones from Brodix, after the Brodix took over, no longer Pontiac, they would have Brodix there. But as you can tell, that's what they look like before. I did not mill those off. This is how they came. And like I said, I think it was just the end of the run. They're like, we need to mill our Pontiac stuff off. We don't want someone to claim it to be ours. That's why I'm fairly certain has happened. If you're like, man, that's a really cool head. It's too bad they don't make it more. Well, kinda. Brodix was the one, I think, casting the heads for them anyway. So Brodix ended up making their own head, and they called it the 10X RI. And instead of having this stuff, of course, it had all the Brodix stuff, and this was a flat face that went across here. The exhaust port did change, and of course, they put their Brodix logos there and there. And also, it's got a smaller exit on the cooling side. Since we're on the exhaust side, I'll go ahead and show you this. These one had dual bolt patterns. So our standard small block Chevy has this pattern here, but also they had the stall pattern. That's this spacing you see here. So you can run a bigger header tube. Because the problem with the regular ones is that they pinch the port. So you can't run too big of a header tube, obviously, because there's just not enough material. Using a stall pattern, there's more. So it's a better thing. Several people on small block Chevys will have an adapter so that we can run a stall pattern, but these are already built in. These are nice exhaust ports that are raised way up from the factory, and that's one of the things. When Brodix got this head from them, or did their own thing from that point after Pontiac dropped them, they actually had two port designs. They had one that was lower down, then they had one that was spread port. So this is standard, but they had one that was spread port where the two inside exhaust ports are moved further apart so you can get more cooling in between. That was used really popular on the sprint car stuff. So that's this view. Let me show you back to the intake view, and we'll show you some other stuff. Now, when I got these heads, unfortunately, I didn't take a whole lot of pictures, but I've got several that I could have used anyway. They're really, really small because they're made to be CNC ported, because that's how NASCAR kind of wanted it to go. But I have ported these. These are a 1206 entry, and they do require shaft rockers, a 550 offset. But these are 1206 raised up, obviously, and looks really nice. Quite a bit of cross-sectional area is available there. This one measures at 2.72, although you can go much larger. You can probably go all the way up to 2.9. I didn't do it on this pair because of this. But as I was going back to what I was saying, this is going to look strange. Okay. The chambers. These chambers look really, really odd. And that's because when I got them, like I said, this customer hit me up and said, hey, could you finish porting these out? You know, I had a guy start on them, and I think he passed. And what he had done is he had hand softened the chamber. That's why you have this parts right here. He'd actually did a really good job of scribing the lines, but he'd only roughed it in. So I had to finish this out, roll the angle. He'd also had the chamber done. So this chamber shape that you see here, that's actually his chamber shape. So I kind of had to use what was already there. Much easier to take out material than it is to add material. So, but he had one of the ports done. I did something a little bit different from he did, made it a little bit larger in certain areas. But as you can tell, I mean, this isn't as big as it could be. I could make it a lot larger. This particular customer, he's actually going to use this on a power adder application anyway. So that's the reason for the softening of the chamber, which I talked about in my turbo motor versus NA motor, softening of the chambers. Is this ideal? No. Typically, it's done in a CNC machine. I just tried to kind of blend it better. It looks goofy. I mean, it's like the poor boy's way of softening chambers, but really it's better to be done in a CNC machine because you can get a better conical design. Because as close as I'm keeping this to have the right taper, the hand can't do that. So is it better? Yeah, it's better, but it's definitely not as good as having it done on a CNC machine. Ports are really good though. These things, even though they're very moderately sized, this is a 2125 intake valve and a 1600 exhaust valve. That intake port flows right about 330 CFM. Great low lift. So it flowed like 260 CFM almost at 400 valve lift, and it would have been better if it hadn't been for the softening of the chamber. This actually hurts flow, especially on the low lift side. Man, it looks so funky. So you could see where I would have looked. See that right there? So you take the curve. This would have been flat. That'd have been way better. This wouldn't have looked so weird. But it was already done that way, and I just had to go with it. Do I think it's better for what he's doing for a power adder deal? Absolutely. Is it appealing to the eye? Not to me, but it is what it is. Looks really good though. These are really cool heads, like I said. The exhaust, by the way, flows about 230 CFM, and that's without an exhaust pipe. I don't use an exhaust pipe. So, anyway, they're raised up, like you said, like you could tell, about 600 thousandths. It's good. It's a good, nice port. But anyway, I thought I'd show you that one other thing before I stop talking about this. The 10XRI, the Brodix version of this, so Brodix actually cast these. When Brodix switched, they made a smaller hole here. So this is gigantic, obviously for NASCAR for the better cooling, but the other ones are much smaller and it's moved further up out of the way. And the other thing that Brodix did, which was ingenious, you see this valve cover ledge right here? That's dumb. What Brodix did was like, well, if you raise up a runner on the head, you have to raise the intake manifold up too because it won't sit right. So you need to move the intake up. So in order to make this a manifold work for this, GM made a bow tie manifold that had more material on the flange to raise it up to line up with these ports. Brodix, whenever they took over the design, they're like, we could do something smarter. Instead of having only one manifold that fits it because only one manifold's wide enough, what they did is, you see this whole section here? They added aluminum from here all the way to here. So instead of having the valve cover rail, it literally comes flat off of it, flat here. So they essentially added a 1/4 inch material so that you could run a different manifold besides only one manifold. You could run some of the common ones. Now, some of them, depending on how far you raise up your ports, you might still have to use a thicker gasket. So that's one of the cool things that they did with it when they just put it out on their own. Now, Brodix doesn't have it on their website anymore, but if you go through a dealer like myself, you can order the 10XRI with the raised runner like that. Now, something else to point out, the head is a 40-60 spacing, which means from standard valve spacing on a small block Chevy head, the intake valve got moved over 40 thousandths closer to the exhaust valve. What that did is it got it away from the cylinder wall. The exhaust valve was moved 60 thousandths toward the cylinder wall, so it moved it away from the intake valve. So what that does is it allows you to run a much larger intake valve than you would on a standard spacing. For instance, you can run a 215 intake valve and a 1600 exhaust valve with this valve spacing. You can't do that on a standard. On a standard valve spacing, I've run a 214 with a 1550 exhaust valve, so or 1560. That's about it. 215, 1600. So you can't run a 1600. The biggest you can run with a standard valve spacing with a 1600 is a 210 valve. So these being that 40-60, you can run larger valves, more valve flow. There's more area, curtain areas available. It's a much better deal. It's also away from the cylinder wall. It's just better. So that's one of the things about it. Anyway, I hope you guys got something out of this video. It's a really neat head. If you find them, you should probably pick them up because they're, like I said, they're really cool and they are neat, and they do make a ton of power. So besides just being a novelty thing, These things are definitely capable of far over 700 horsepower NA. So worth the money head. Anyway, you guys take care. Remember, I'm no Superman, and I do not port cast iron heads.